Perfect. All right. Welcome to the Sweet Science of Fighting podcast. Today we have Christian. Please tell me I say your last name right. Thibaudeau. Is that correct?
That's acetyl. That's acetyl. Yeah, it's pretty good.
Yeah. Okay. Perfect. We'll go with that. But I mean, you've been around I guess, the fitness industry for a long time. I've been following you since first started in this space. Obviously, you being heavily involved in T Nation and obviously
Mhm.
a lot of your own things. So, do you want to just provide a brief background about yourself for the listeners, and we're going to go straight into some of your unique concepts.
Yeah, well, that's the thing I really hate doing, talking about myself, right? So I
I
guess
think
I
we
have to,
all the same.
oh, dude. So really, I started out training for American football when I was actually that's not 100% accurate. I actually started training when I was like in grade school. I was something like 10 years old, and like I was one of the smart kids, but I had a very strong inferiority complex, right? And I needed to be respected, admired, or anything for something physical because I was like average height, not particularly good looking. I was shy around people, so I felt, well, I need to stand out. So I need, well, so I'm going to be good at sports because if you're good at sports, then people respect you. And much to my dismay, even though I pretty much played every sport there is, I was always like middle of the pack, and never like
Hmm.
bad, but never good enough to shine, right?
That's
So
every
that's
coach,
my,
isn't
yeah, it is, it is. Uh,
it?
so I started training when I was like 10 years old because I thought that it would actually make me better at sports. I mean, I was pretty advanced for my age because I made that connection right from the start.
Mm.
And that started from there. And I remember when I was 12 entering high school and I decided to play high school football, American football. And I felt, well, I want to be a receiver because that's the guys who get all the touchdowns and stuff like that. I'm going to be admired. The girls are going to love me, even though I was going to an all boys school. Anyway, so I said, well, I need to run fast. That's all I need to do. So I only trained legs for like the first 2 years of my life. The complete opposite than
Yeah,
every
exactly.
human male has ever done. The first 2 years, it was only legs every single day. Like 5 days a week at school, I was at the gym, hitting squats, leg press. Basically, I would just take every single leg exercise there was at the gym and I would do it every single day. So that was my introduction to training. And after, well, the problem is that I'm only like a meter 73, so that's not really tall enough to be a football player. So when I
Yep.
entered college, I decided to switch to Olympic weightlifting because, well, I was better suited for that sport. I was decent on the Olympic lifts when I was training for football, so I felt, well, might as well do it as my main sport. And eventually that led to also some strength work, some bodybuilding work, and eventually to strength coaching. Because the fact that I was able to teach the Olympic lifts got me working with athletes in the first place because I was in a very small Canadian town and very few people actually knew these lifts. And back then there
Mm.
was no real strength coaching. My original mentor was the only strength coach in the region, and right from the bat, I was 19, and he told me, "Well, you're gonna train the guys in the gym. I'm going to do the programming." So I was 19, training like 28-year-old professional hockey players. So that's how it got started.
No, that's awesome, mate. Which you, not the same path, but a similar path. Like I'm the same height as you. I got into Olympic weightlifting eventually as well. I think it somewhat suits our body types,
Right,
being relatively moderately tall or short. But
compact.
yeah, oh, there we go. Compact. I'll steal that one. But I think what is really interesting is, for me at least, is your neurotyping system. And I
Right.
listened to a lot of your stuff in the past, and one of your Just Fly podcasts you did, this must have been, I was working in professional rugby at the time, so it was probably 5 years ago, I think. I can still remember that episode. It was really good. You touched on different things, so we'll touch on some things in there. But first, for the audience and myself, do you want to maybe just define or touch on what neurotyping is, and we can go into some of the details?
Yeah, neurotyping probably comes from the fact that I come from a psychologist family. Both my parents were psychologists, and I've actually worked with my father, and I always understood the impact of personality on performance in sports as well as performance in life. I also understood from a very young age that if you're a coach, for example, and you're working with a team of several players, well, not all players, or if you're training with athletes of many different sports, not all sport players respond to your command the same way or to your approach the
Mm.
same way. And I felt that, you know what, most coaches basically stay the same even though the personality of the athletes they're working with vary widely. So with
Mm.
one athlete, for example, your approach might really work well because it connects, it drives them, it hits all the emotional chords, if you want to call it that, that helps them be the best version of themselves. But with other, it actually had the complete opposite effect. And that's true for the way you give feedback, the way you teach, and I
Mm.
found that it's even true for the type of training you are applying to various people. I right away, I saw and concluded that some people will do a lot better than others with abbreviated, very heavy training, whereas others will respond a lot better to a higher stimulus training program with a lot more volume. And some are naturally gifted or prefer explosive work, and so on and so forth.
Mm.
And that was basically my driving point. But the real reason I actually started to develop the neurotyping system was uh, because I needed to understand my own flaws. I mean, I always saw myself as a deeply flawed individual, like self-esteem issues, always seeking approval from others, which can actually be good because it drove me to excel in some fields, but it also puts a lot of pressure. I don't deal well with criticism. I don't deal well with disrespect. I mean, I have a nobody likes being disrespected. Don't get me wrong, but I have like this exaggerated response to lack of respect or perceived lack of respect, and I need to understand why I was this way. Why was I always worried about this thing and that thing and stuff like that? I wanted to be the best version of myself, and that just started digging into a rabbit hole and found the connection between the neurotransmitter levels and personality profiles or personality traits. So, and many of them are actually inherited or genetic, if you want to call it that.
Mm.
And I was reminded of when I was looking at my son, even when he was 2 years old, he basically has the exact same personality as I do. So a lot of
Mm.
it is genetic. Of course, you have always learned behavior, but learned behavior will only make you vary within your own genetic predisposition.
Gotcha. So neurotyping then, at least the system is predominantly the psychological aspects. Is there any physical parts of that, or I guess any physical traits that influence that system as well?
There is because I found that there was some connections between various neurotransmitter as well as muscle fiber typology, for example. I mean, and it makes sense because if your brain is wired, for example, to be violent and explosive, then it makes sense that you would have the physiology to support what you're built for, right? That's
Yeah.
one thing. And you see some connections, like, for example, people who are naturally very explosive will have a higher acetylcholine level because acetylcholine level it potentiate the stretch reflex. That's one way that the neurotransmitter profile or personality can actually be connected with performance. Furthermore, acetylcholine being the neurotransmitter that plays the biggest role in neurological transmission, people with higher acetylcholine levels will learn much more easily. And more
Mm.
importantly, they are very good visual learners. Like they will just look at someone perform an exercise and they can actually almost feel it in their own body. Like people with high acetylcholine levels will be extremely fast learners when it comes to motor habits, motor patterns, skills. They get that very, very quickly. These are the people who might pick up golf and within a week they'll shoot like 80. And we just hate these people. When anything they try, they're instantly good at it. And like they might switch. I mean, I was training an athlete who was national level in one sport, and within a year was a national level in other sport. And that's just the kind of people that have acetylcholine levels. Now, some people will actually deal better with stress than others. Some people will need stress more than others. Some people who are built for high effort, short effort, will tend to have a higher ratio of fast twitch fibers, again, to support the mechanics they have. So there's not a perfect, but a strong
Mm.
connection, correlation between uh, neurological, psychological, if you want to call it. I prefer to call it neurological. Psychological is more like a behavior observation model,
Gotcha.
whereas neurological is more looking at the biochemical structure of the brain,
Yeah.
creating those behaviors. But yeah, there's a pretty strong connection between all of that. And again, as far as raw physiological research, we found gradually more and more clues that genetic component that is in your DNA will impact your personality. For example, some people will
Mm.
be born with a fast version of the COMT enzyme. Okay, they call O-methyltransferase enzyme. That's the enzyme that breaks down adrenaline or dopamine when it's released, the two neurotransmitter that amps you up. So people who
Mm.
break it down really, really fast, they will be extremely good under stress because as soon as adrenaline goes up, well, it can come back down at any time, right? Whereas some
Mm.
people will have really bad or slow COMT enzyme, then the problem is once they release adrenaline and dopamine, it stays with them for a long time. They will get into like a small traffic incident, right? And it will
Yeah.
piss them up the whole day. Now, these people might, when the situation gets stressful, they might crumble under pressure because they get over amped up. They get tight. They overthink. They overreact. So knowing
Mm.
someone's personality profile can actually help you as a coach to put the person in the better situation for them, or change your interactions. I mean, if you take someone with high acetylcholine level who is a very good visual learner and you
Mm.
give them like 10,000 coaching cues, it will just like bore their brain out of their mind, and they will actually have a reverse effect on learning. They will get worse because now they become overthinkers. But if you have someone who is a naturally anxious person, some people with an over worrier. So typically that's someone with very high adrenaline level, very low serotonin, very low GABA. So he's always amped up. Okay, the brain is always firing on all cylinders, which creates anxiety because anxiety is nothing more than your neurons firing too fast for you to control your brain, and it gets out of control. That's all that anxiety is. A panic attack is your brain going so fast that you lose control of your thought processes, and your thought processes like create stories, create emotions that aren't there, right?
Mm.
So those people who are more anxious, they actually need those 10,000 cues because they need to know in every little single detail the task to do. Otherwise, they are overwhelmed with anxiety and they
Mm.
just can't perform optimally.
Do you find that the top of the top elite athletes are maybe high in the acetyl choline?
100%.
I guess, yeah, just because they learn faster, so they're the ones that just pick everything up. They're the ones that are the best at the sport.
Absolutely. I mean, you will
Yeah.
always have grinders who have lower motor skills, who are not natural athletes, and who got there through sheer work and will, right?
Yeah.
Resiliency. I mean, you will have these guys, but they are few and far between. I mean, and I'm not belittling the importance of hard work. I mean,
Yeah.
hard work and the competitive spirit is paramount to elite athletics. But people who need to compensate a lack of motor skill or lack of motor learning capacity with simply doing more work to get there, well, it's rare because when you think about it, if you need to do 5, 6 times the amount of work as somebody else to get to the same level, well, you're going to burn yourself out pretty quickly. And
Hmm.
because of that, it's almost unsustainable, and they get more injured because once you are neurologically fatigued from all that effort, then quality of movement suffer and you put yourself at risk of injuries. So they will always be grinders, but they are much rarer
Yeah.
than the natural athletes when you look at elite level sports. That's why when you look at the profile of elite athletes, it tends to be narrower than when you work with lower level athletes because of simply a selection process that only the top ones make it to the top.
Yeah. No, I'm with you there. I've worked with a few of the people at the top level, and I mean, yeah, I've talked to this many times on the podcast too. Like, they can be so shit in the gym. No, you're good. They're good. They can be so bad in the gym, not strong, nothing. But then on the field or whatever they're doing, they crush everyone and they're stronger than everyone on the field in their sport. And it's, yeah, it's the difference between that gym strength versus actually being good at the sport and
Yeah,
being strong in the sport. Before getting back to the podcast, I want to let you know there's a link down in the description for the Swedes Arts of Fighting underground community. You can get all the help you need for your combat sports training. You get every single Swedes Arts of Fighting training program, online course, and you get access to a range of coaches within the private Discord community. So go check that out, and back to the podcast. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, I mean, you always have some positions in some sport where you can have one physical trait that allows you to dominate, even though you're not the most skilled person. Okay, for example, in American football, if you are a defensive lineman or a fullback, if you're stronger than everybody else, even if you have a low skill, you can probably dominate at least to some degree, right?
Yeah.
But that is the exception, and that's really sport specific.
Yeah. Do you want to maybe dive into some of the neurotypes things? I know you got different types based on your test. Do you want to maybe dive into some of those? And a lot of the audience, I guess, fighters themselves or athletes themselves, so they might see themselves in certain categories. I think you got a free test on your site too for people to see.
Yeah, yeah. If you go on Thibaudeau.com, you can actually download a free resource that explain all the neurotypes. And obviously, it's weird that you mentioned that because when I give conferences or seminars, I actually get more questions regarding like relationships or jobs than I do about training athletes because, well, it's personality profiling. So I
Mm,
apply it to sports, but the same apply to any aspect of your life. And basically, it's just understanding how your body works, right? So if you look at we have like three big categories of types, and each category has two subtypes. So the three categories will be the type 1, the type 2, and the type 3. The type 1 would be someone who has a high dopamine response. So either they are very sensitive to dopamine, like the type 1B, or they keep their dopamine for very long when they release it, the type 1A. I'm going to get back to these types in a moment. I'm
yeah.
just giving the broad strokes here. The type 2 would be more dominant on adrenaline. Okay, basically, they morph into a different personality when adrenaline is on or off. So I'm going to use myself as an example. When I'm under a low adrenaline state, so I'm relaxed, I'm shy, I'm introverted, I lack confidence, I have problem with speech, uh, on you name it. Like I'm really like the typical introvert. But as soon as adrenaline kicks in, I morph into like an alpha version of myself. I become extremely extroverted, very verbal. My thinking processes speed up quite a bit. So basically, it's like between like Dr. Banner and the Incredible Hulk. That would be the comparison for the type. Okay, and the type 3 would be the more analytic personalities. They are the overthinkers. They are those who might have chronic anxiety. They have people who like routine, they like repetitiveness because they constantly have high adrenaline and the neurotransmitter responsible for calming the brain down are very low. So they are always in that heightened state. And the reaction to that, at least for them, is to be overthinker. They have this inside stress, and the only way to fight that is to reveal nothing about themselves, only do what they know will work. They don't take chances. They don't like variations. So if you look at the types, okay, and the types 1, which tends to dominate the field of athletics at the highest level, you have the type 1A and the type 1B. The type 1A, if I could use one personality to describe a type 1A, and just by using that, nobody will want to be a type 1A, but I think it really shows exactly what it is. It would be Donald Trump. Like extremely extroverted, needs to be the leader, needs to dominate
Mm,
every situation, needs to be the center of attention, is willing to do absolutely anything to win. So these are normally like extraordinarily competitive, extremely hardworking individuals. They treat absolutely everything like a contest. They not
mm,
only are they good under pressure, they actually seek conflict. I was funny. It's funny because I was watching Arnold Schwarzenegger's documentary, and he said
mhm.
that never let a good crisis goes to waste. That's like so 1A. It's like the perfect
Yeah.
sentence to describe these
Like
people.
Conor McGregor, Michael Jordan, all of them would fall into the same thing,
Exactly.
right?
These would be
Yeah.
two extremely good examples. Never let a good conflict goes to waste, meaning that if there is no conflict, they might create it because they thrive in that situation. And
Yeah.
nothing is worse than a type 1A in a peaceful and stable environment. Their brain gets bored out of their mind, okay? And so that would be the typical personality of the 1A. The 1B is also extremely competitive, but because of a higher level of serotonin and a higher level of GABA than the type 1A, which can act as a brake to all that competitiveness, they can turn it on and off pretty easily.
Mm.
So they are extremely competitive. They need to win, but they don't have the need to crush other people. They don't need to cheat. They will not do everything possible to win, just what they feel is just and fair, right? The best natural athletes would be the 1Bs, those who have the highest motor skill levels, those who acquire skills very easily because they have very high acetylcholine, but also very high serotonin levels. Now, I know that if you don't know biochemistry, that doesn't tell you anything, but as I mentioned about acetylcholine, it's the neurotransmitter of motor learning and also explosiveness. But also, serotonin. Serotonin is a neurotransmitter that is, I would like to call it the adjustment neurotransmitter. Serotonin allows you to adapt your neurological activation state. So are you amped up or you calm down or in between, and adapt it optimally to the situation you're in. So basically, it allows you to fit neurologically in the situation you're in.
Mm.
So if the situation is stressful, it will allow your brain to get sped up and activated, but not so much that you get panic, right? And
Hmm.
and if you need to relax yourself, it will also allow you to relax. So these people are very good at uh, going from one thing to the other. They adapt very quickly to changes in situations. So they are not upset when, okay, I was supposed to do this today, but let's do this instead. They actually love that. They love variation. They need variation because acetylcholine and serotonin are the two neurotransmitter that needs to be high to be good at facing new situations without stress. Okay,
Mm.
the type twos are more. Uh, I wouldn't say they're not competitive, but their driving force. I mean, the driving force of the type 1As is winning. Okay, that's the driving
Hmm.
force, the competitiveness. The type 2, the driving force is being respected. Okay, which is different. I
Hmm.
mean, winning will get me respected, but in many endeavors, just being good enough, like to get third, is good enough to be respected. See what I mean? So the type
Yeah.
twos, oftentimes it's weird. Like if you play a sport, they won't tell you that, but subconsciously, the type 2A, even the type 2B, the best spot to be on the podium for them is second because it's good enough to get them respect, but the number one will not be pissed. So if he's number one, the number two is always pissed at number one. See what I mean? So now he's good enough to be respected, but also nobody will hate him. Everybody hates the first, right? So basically, the driving force is they need to feel that other people respect them, like them. Okay, so because of that, if you look at the type 2A, which is my type, the type 2As are the morphers, the social chameleons. They will adapt their personality to the person they're in, which sometimes make them seem sleazy or because they like it sounds like they don't have any personality of their own. They will often modify their opinion based on the people they're talking with. And they often pretty good at arguing both sides. So depending on what they feel will get them the most respect or admiration or likeness or being that the person in front of them will like them more, they will use that opinion. They will become that opinion. See what I mean?
Hmm.
So it's kind of hard to pinpoint their exact personality because they can change very quickly. Because their strategy is, I'm going to change into something that I think that this person will like. So one of their best strategy for that is that they are extremely good from birth, not from birth, but from very early on, at reading body language. That's why 2As actually oftentimes make very good coaches, because they can very easily read the body language of the people they're working with, and they have the capacity to change their personality to suit what they've seen, right?
Yeah.
And the reason for that is the type 2As naturally have very low self-esteem, but so they need to feel respected, admired, liked, loved, whatever, right? But because of that low self-esteem, they don't trust people who give them compliments. Compliments always seem funny to them, because, well, if you believe, for example, let's say that someone tells you that, "Hey, you're so good looking," and in your mind you're ugly as fuck, right? There's no way you're gonna believe that person who tells you that you're good looking, right?
Yeah.
The only way for them to know if someone likes them or not is to be able to read body language. So from a very, very early age, they develop that skill naturally. Okay, so that's pretty much what they are. They are often, I would say, modelizer. They will like have this one person at the moment who they idolize or they model themselves upon, and they will copy that person. A funny story: a few years back, I was trying to get back into weightlifting. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
and at the moment, like Klokov was very popular among CrossFit
Yep.
athletes. So
Mm-hmm.
I said, well, I want to be Klokov. I mean, he's jacked and stuff. So and weird. I mean, I bought all the Klokov clothes. Like I had the Russia winter shirt. I bought his bar. I bought his
Yeah.
program. I was walking like Klokov in the gym. And that's not on purpose. I was actually doing that. Like when I was first training for Olympic weightlifting, I actually had some white T-shirt, and I printed Bulgaria in the back, because I was looking for all the Bulgarian strength. So,
Yep.
so the type 2As are like that. They will look at, oh, this is a great coach, or this is a great athlete. I'm going to train like it. And just the fact that you're training like someone you idolize will boost your own self-esteem and boost your own motivation. So the best way for these guys is to perform is to find a good mentor, and you as a coach is to act like that. So for example, I started coaching high school football again, not just for strength training, but actually coaching football. And I have this one player who is the exact, like the prototypical 2As, like extremely low self-esteem, but he kills it in the weight room, because he feels, well, if I'm stronger, it's going to earn the respect of the team. And every week he comes up with, I've seen this video of Von Miller's move. Can we practice this at train? And every week or every day it would be a different video from a different player. And so,
Yep.
so with that guy, you need to become a mentor to that guy. So you basically like you make him feel like you're putting special attention to him, and not that you encourage him like in looking at his videos, but you steer it in the right direction. And type 2Bs will be your overly emotional people. Okay. Again, there are subtypes, but I'm just going with the broad types because it's
Yeah.
already complex as it is, and it's like a 12-hour seminar. But the 2Bs, the best way to describe them is emotions. They are driven by the need to be loved. Okay, that's different than being respected. Okay, they need to
Mm-hmm.
be loved as a person. So the type 2B, they want someone to like the person they are, whereas the type 2A, they want the people to respect what they are. So anyway, that's a different strategy. The type 2B strategy will be to act as a confidant, act as someone who always is there for everybody. He will be everybody's best friend. He's the over carer. See what I mean? And that's because he has very, very, very high glutamate level. Okay, high glutamate level. Glutamate is, well, first, glutamate, if you look at the textbook, it's mostly a memory neurotransmitter, okay? But the reason for that is because it's an emotional amplifier. The more glutamate you have, the stronger your emotions are, okay? So what happens is that if you have a very positive emotion, it's becoming like the best day of your life. But if you have a very like slightly negative emotion, it becomes, I'm going to kill myself, okay? I'm exaggerating. Okay, so but
Mm-hmm.
but they are extremely emotional and have very large mood swings because of that, right? And that's because, again, the glutamate is an emotional amplifier. And the way it works on memory is that, well, the way the memory is selective. Okay, it's impossible to store in your brain every single little thing that happens to you every day. That's just way too much information. There must be a selection process. And one of the keys that the body uses, so the brain uses, to know which memories will occupy the biggest place in your brain, which is stored with more accuracy and more details, would be the emotional state you're in when that happens to you. And that's a survival mechanism because, for example, if you had a situation and you had a very, very strong fear, then it's going to be imprinted in your brain so that you avoid that situation in the future. Or that you also ingrain the way you got out of that situation. Make sense? And similarly, if you have a very positive emotion, well, it's going to be imprinted in your brain because we will try to get to that again. Okay, so that's the way the brain works, and that's why glutamate is a memory neurotransmitter. But at the core of its function, it's an emotional amplifier. If you look at if we go back to the type 1A, like the Donald Trump I mentioned earlier,
Mm-hmm.
or the Conor McGregor or the Michael Jordan being a great example of that. That's one guy who I don't want to say he wasn't skilled, okay, but there are many, many players who had more skill or natural talent than Michael Jordan. I mean, he missed a lot of shots. But he outworked everybody. And that's one of the examples of a grinder who could actually become the top just by overworking everybody and just through sheer willpower, right? But a type 1A, they have very, very, very low glutamate level. So that's why the emotions are very stable. That's why also they have no empathy. You look at Jordan, the way he talked about his teammates not working hard enough and getting on their back. That's someone who doesn't have empathy, right? If I'm working here, everybody needs to be working there. Understanding that not everybody is the same. But that's the type 1A. The type 1A cannot change their personality. Type 1A is not empathetic. He doesn't understand other people's emotion. He cannot put himself into other people's places. But if you look at the 2Bs will have a fairly high level of acetylcholine and also a very high level of glutamate, which makes them extraordinarily empathetic. Because empathy is first feeling what the other person feels, right? So you can have intellectual empathy, meaning that you understand that this person is sad, so I'm going to change my behavior. That's one thing, okay? I have that. People who read body language have that, okay? But that's not true empathy. True empathy is, I see that you're sad, and it actually makes me sad. And I can't control it. I just develop the same emotion because there's a thing, and sorry, I'm going off course about training.
No, you're good.
We have something in your brain called the mirror neurons. Okay, mirror neurons are there for motor learning, the visual learning. They discovered mirror neurons when they were doing studies on monkeys. They put an electrode on the brain of a monkey, was eating a banana, and a certain region of the brain would light up. That he would give the banana away, a different region of the brain would light up. He would grab something, a different part. So basically did the study just to see which part of the brain would light up depending on the actions, okay? And the second study, they put a second monkey in front, also with electrodes. And he was just observing the first one. And they noticed that the same zone would light up in the observer monkey as the doer monkey, plus another small zone, which was the mirror neuron zone. The mirror neurons basically tell other neurons to activate based on what you're seeing. And that's the root of visual learning, okay? And acetylcholine potentiate those mirror neurons, okay? So that, for example, I have a pretty high level of acetylcholine, so when I'm looking at someone do, let's say, a lat pull down, I can actually feel my own lats contracting, or at least some tension, okay? So empathy, acetylcholine would be the first thing. I'm looking at your body language, and my brain can actually light up the same zone of the brain that would light up if I had that position. If someone is like this, My brain knows that if I'm like this, I'm sad, and this region of my brain, the one that creates sadness, would light up. So if I'm seeing someone like this, the same zone would light up in my brain.
Mm-hmm.
And then glutamate will amplify the emotions. So the more glutamate I have, the stronger the feeling gets, and the more I actually feel the person's emotion. That's true empathy. And that would be the type 2Bs. So they take everything personal. They tend to gravitate more toward jobs like nursing, like psychology, like where you help people. Okay, but not doctors. Doctors are typically the type 1 situation. They are extremely competitive by nature. That's because of the way medical school is built. And then the type 3s will be your chronic overthinkers. People who overanalyze everything. I mean, the extreme case of type 3 personality would be OCD behavior. I mean, Georges St. Pierre is like that. I mean, Georges St. Pierre will always, for example, when he's on the road, he said, I'm going to hold my breath until the light turns red or whatever. So he always does those things. He always does things the same way. But he's extremely structured. So you can actually become a great athlete if you're a type 3. But you need to set up routines. You need to set up fixed behavior, fixed schedules. These are the athletes who will be good only if they know exactly what can happen, what will happen, and how I react when this happens. Okay, I'm going to give an example. We had a goaltender in hockey in Canada. Was a great goaltender, but once they changed the defensive pairings in front of him, he became a completely different player. Not because the defender, even if the defensive players were just as good, but they played a different style. They were not they didn't react to the puck position the same way. So he couldn't, like, in his brain, he had created this. If this happened, I do that. But that was changed. So it took him a long time to readapt, and it created anxiety, which led to drinking problems to fight the anxiety. Anyway, but these are the overthinkers. Someone who, for example, I will teach them a squat for like 20 minutes. Okay, going through everything from wrist position to feet position, and after that, they still have 10 questions, and they will have 10 follow-up questions to the 10 questions. And then once I explained everything, they said, well, but they will come back next week. But I saw a video of Chris Duffin doing something different on squats. So that's not because he's doubting my capacity as a coach. It's because they need to have all the humanly possible knowledge about the squat to feel comfortable. Otherwise, it just creates more anxiety, which creates more tightness, which impact movement. Because that's one thing. I mean, choking is misunderstood in sports. Choking, 9 times out of 10, is more an issue of overexcitation of the brain rather than the brain calming down. Okay, what happens is we have like the reverse U curve, okay, the inverted U curve of performance. So basically, if you're down in the bottom, your brain is firing very slowly. I'm not amped up. I'm not activated, so my performance is low. As I amp my brain up, my performance capacity increases until I reach my apex. Then if I keep activating furthermore, it doesn't increase. It starts to decrease. And here would be choking zone. The reason you're choking is that, let's look at, for example, muscle strength, okay, and muscle tension and muscle tone. The more adrenaline you have, the more amped up your brain is, the harder your muscle is. The muscle tone increases, but that allows you to be more reactive. It allows you to be stronger. It allows you to be faster. So that will improve performance as you amp your brain up. But if you over-amp it, what will happen is that an increase in muscle tone becomes a tight muscle. A higher strength production become impossible to control your strength output. Okay, so basically you will lose movement precision because your range of motion will be cut short, and that especially happens in the flexor muscles, hip flexors, hamstrings, pec minor, traps. These are the muscles that get tight under tension. Like when I give a seminar, my traps and feels like I've just done like 20 sets of shrugs, and my hip flexors are so tight, I couldn't drop into a body weight squat. Even though normally, even like just standing out of bed, I could front squat like 400, okay, because I'm a natural squatter. That's what that does. So imagine if you're an athlete, you create the overactivation that makes your hip flexors tight. That's going to affect your running. Not just your stride length, but your stride mechanic. You're going to loop your feet around to compensate for the
Mm.
lack of extension. So that was one of the reasons for choking. If you're a weightlifter, for example, getting tight hip flexors and tight traps, you can't finish the pull. So you pull
Yeah.
forward. That would just be one example. Then, on a brain level, if you amp your brain up, you're thinking faster, you're more competitive, you're more driven. But if you over amp it up, now you are overthinking and you are reacting too fast. So now you're
Mhm.
making bad decisions. So that's what leads to choking under pressure is someone who is not capable of controlling their excitatory levels. And that would be a function of either GABA or serotonin.
Gotcha. Nice. And saying a lot of these different types as well, I can relate to completely. I think I'm a 2A as well, based on what you're saying. My fitness pal account, my username's Klokov. So I think we followed this. I think we followed the same route there, trying to mimic Klokov with that. But can you be a blend of different types? I'm thinking now, my wife, she's a professional weightlifter, Commonwealth medalist in Olympic weightlifting, CrossFit, like all sorts of achievements.
Yeah,
She would be a 1B because of that, but she'd also be a 2B. She's a sports psychologist, a
yeah,
whole lot of empathy, but should also be in the type 3 category
yeah.
because of anxiety and things like that. So
But
do you have people across the
that's
whole
a
spectrum?
typical 2A. That's a typical 2A.
Yeah,
Uh,
okay.
because the way the 2A is it's literally a blend of everything.
Gotcha.
They have the neurological capacity to be any type. Some will be, they will change their type depending on the intensity of the situation. Like me, when I'm presenting, I'm a 1A. When I'm uh, under stress, I'm actually becoming more of a type 3. But it also
Mhm.
can be just because your brain learned that to be good in that part of my life, I need to be that personality. To be good in
Yeah.
that part of my life, I need to be good in that personality.
Mm.
Then again, uh, a, a type 3 is not a bad profile or an unusual profile for a weightlifter. The difference
Yeah.
between weightlifting and, in fact, weightlifting of all the strength sports is the best for type 3 because it's about precision. It's about proper body mechanics. It's not, well, yes, it's about load because your goal is to lift more weight,
Yeah.
but technique is the way you do that. I mean, you can, a very good technical lifter with decent strength will outlift a very strong lifter with poor technique. Okay,
Yeah.
so type 3 are masters technician. They will be very patient in developing technique, whereas like a type 1A, they just can't wait to add weight to the bar. So
Yeah.
they oftentimes will be very strong, like Bulgarians, but and the technique just is not there. It's not as efficient as like the Chinese, for example. I mean, lots
Yeah.
of Chinese lifters would be type 3, but that's a weird thing, though, and that actually it brought in the importance of the way you were brought up because
Mm.
it can also play a role. If I remember, I was at a client who was a weightlifter, and after the test, he scored the same in the 1B category and in the type 3 category. Both were very high. And that's very unusual because these are basically polar opposite types.
Mm.
But he was a Chinese lifter who was brought up in a traditional Chinese family where, I mean, again, that's no disrespect to the nation or anything, but they are
Yeah.
extremely controlling. It's very
Yeah.
hierarchy based. You don't speak out of order, so you basically ingrain yourself into being a type 3, even if you're born a type 1B. See what I mean? We see that a lot also in former militaries, because
Mm.
military, it's a type 3 thing. Yeah, you have the gung ho people who jump out of parachute and shoot at people, but at its core, the military is about respecting orders, always folding your bed the right way, always eating the same thing at the same time, doing always the same regimented practices and stuff like that. So that's more suited for a type 3. So that's something that can actually morph your profile, and you take habits from that profile. So that could be possible. But typically, when you see
Mhm.
high traits of 2Bs, 3, and 2As,
Yeah.
that would probably indicate a type 2A with high glutamate.
Gotcha. Did you know you can represent Sweet Arts of Fighting while you're training? We're more than just a membership. We also have rash guards and shorts. If you're watching this on YouTube, you'll see that we have the Sweet Arts of Fighting 2.0 shorts, and we also have the Sweet Arts of Fighting short and long sleeve rash guard. There is another design coming soon, but you can get those on xmarshall.com, and you can go down the description and you can find that. And back to the podcast. Gotcha. Okay. So
And
I'm
one
going to try.
part,
Oh,
pardon?
no, you go. You go.
Now you probably will find that our anxiety will be highly dependent on our fatigue level.
Mm.
The more fatigued they are, the more serotonin comes down. So it's much harder to bring down adrenaline, and
Mm.
the brain becomes more overactive because a three neurotransmitter that can amp the brain up are dopamine, adrenaline, and glutamate. So someone
Yeah.
who's very empathetic, okay, will have
Mm-hmm.
high glutamate, and that high glutamate also amps your brain up, which can also create anxiety. Like the type
Yeah.
3 will have high
Gotcha.
glutamate and also high adrenaline. And
Mm-hmm.
the reason why it's weird because type 3 are typically fairly empathetic. Okay, and also because they want to avoid conflict, they seek to understand how people are feeling to avoid those conflicts, but they don't externalize it
Mm.
because for them, like taking other people's emotion and talking about them and because being empathetic, you need to share your emotions too. Type 3s will be more protective about their emotions because they see that as a potential way of making themselves weaker and exposing themselves to a more stressful situation. But
Yeah.
biomechanically, biochemically, yeah, the type 2A, if they have high glutamate, the 100% will have traits of a type 3.
Nice. And I want
And the
to bring
type
this and
2A,
try.
when you think about
Oh, yep.
it,
No, carry on.
I was going to say the type 2, I only talk about the main types, but there are subtypes of the 2A, for example. And the
Gotcha.
2A actor is very, very close to the 1B. Okay, very
Mm.
close.
Mm.
So they have acetylcholine, but just a little bit lower than the type 1B. They have high adrenaline sensitivity, but they also have high glutamate. So they
Gotcha.
can, the difference between I'm a type 2A, the passionate. Type 2A passionate is I don't control my change in behavior. It depends on my emotional state. Whereas a type 2A actor can change their behavior. They can create personalities and pick the one they want to be depending on the situation they're in. And the type 2A actor is very close to a type 1B.
Gotcha. So I want to try bring this as practical as possible for a lot of the fighters listening. If they identify as one of these neurotypes, maybe they go through your document. I'll link that in the description too. Does does that influence the way they should train or can train? Are there changes in training that you would make based on the neurotype?
Yes and no. Meaning that the stimulus to train or the way you need to train will still be influenced by the need of your sport if you're an athlete. Okay.
Yeah.
If you're a sprinter and you were type 2B, you're not going to train like a bodybuilder, even though that's a type of training that type 2Bs will respond to. So there's a
Okay.
difference between the type of training that will be the easiest and most natural and more satisfying for your neurotype and the type of training you should be doing for your sport and for yourself. Ideally, you'd find a way to at least make it close to what your body needs and your brain needs while still being applicable to your sport. But if you just look at the broad strokes, the type 1, both 1A and 1B, will be normally more aimed at the training load, meaning the main driving force will be gradually increasing the weight. They
Hmm.
need to see that they're getting stronger and better with their training. So that typically makes them better suited for higher intensity trainings. If
Hmm.
we're talking about strength, that would be more, that would be their natural setup. The main difference is that the type 1B can tolerate a bit more volume. They can do more variation because they have high acetylcholine. So they are capable of quickly like adapting to a new exercise. They also have very good capacity to transfer the gains from one exercise to another. Like they will increase their front squat, even if they haven't back squatted for 2 months, the back squat will go up.
Hmm.
Someone like a type 1A, If they improve their front squat, but don't train the front squat, the back squat will go down. So they don't have
Okay.
that capacity to transfer motor skills. So the type 1A would be a lot more like, if we look at weightlifting, it would be more, I don't want to say Bulgarian model, but Bulgarian model with smarter intensity programming, like very small
Yeah.
exercise selection. Whereas the type 1B would be more Russian model, Russian or Chinese model, with lots of variation, lots of assistance exercises, because they can
Yeah.
actually benefit from assistance exercise a lot more than type 1A. Then if we look at uh, training in general for performance, the type 1A will be better suited for raw strength, heavy work, heavy partials, stuff like that. Whereas the type 1B will tend to use acceleration, the stretch reflex a lot more. So doing
Mhm.
like slow eccentrics won't work well for them. Doing like pause lifting is not going to be in their wheelhouse, but they will be very good at using the stretch reflex. So we're going to use more accelerative movement. Even if I'm using like slow eccentrics, with
Mhm.
a type 1B, I will allow them to speed up in the last quarter of range of motion to still get a stretch reflex. Otherwise, their performance drop is just too large. Like a type 1A, if they go from a regular squat to a slow eccentric squat, they might drop like 5%, whereas a
Mhm.
type 1B will lose 30%. Okay. And
Gotcha.
if we look at more of a like bodybuilding approach, the type 1A would be like typical, like Dorian Yates style, Mike Manzer style, progressive
Mhm.
overload or DC training. I'm just add
Yeah.
more weight or beat the logbook, beat the logbook. If they were looking at a powerlifting program, the best example of a pure 1A program would be the 531 by Jim Wendler, who is
Mhm.
as 1A as one can be. Okay. So that would, whereas it's funny because like Dave Tate, if you know Dave
Yep.
Tate is a 1B, like he's a very explosive lifter. And he responds well to he needs variation. And that's why, for example, some people they will try the West Side system for strength, and they will get
Yeah.
massively better on their totals. And other people it won't move, because the West Side system doesn't train the squat, bench, and deadlift heavy. They train variations of the squat, bench, and
Yeah.
deadlift heavy. So if you don't have the capacity to naturally transfer strength gains to the competitive movements, that and you won't perform. Okay. Also, the type 1B will naturally get a lot more transfer from the weight room to the field than the type
Mm.
1A, because of the so for I like to use a transfer phase where I use complexes. For example, I might
Yep.
do a strength movement or power movement along with a sports skill, or like a controlled sports skill, like a sprint, like a jump, or like a
Mhm.
kick or something like that, whatever. And the transfer phase for the 1A would be a lot longer. The type 1 you might not even need a transfer phase because they transfer so fast. So that would be like a
Gotcha.
broad strokes thing. Now, the type 2A, everything works. The worst thing for type 2A is to stick to the same program for a long time. I mean, that's
Mhm.
extremely hard. I mean, one of the most excruciating experience I had was when I did Shako's
Yeah.
program on powerlifting,
Mhm.
which was basically squat, bench, deadlift pretty much almost every day. And I
For
love
stupid
these
volume.
movements, but well, that's the thing, though. I tried it when I was 45, so it wasn't really good for my joint. I felt was, but there's very little variation. See what I mean? So after
Mhm.
like 3 weeks, it gets boring. Same thing for me. Like 5-2-1. After 3 weeks, it gets boring.
Yeah.
I need variation. I need to experiment things. I need to throw something in my training. So that's the main thing with the type 2As. If you stick to the exact same approach for a long time, they will gradually lose performance, because their motivation goes down, and subconsciously they just don't train as hard. The type 2Bs, but the 2As, they can actually do anything as long as it's for a short training block. That's why
Yeah.
for type 2As, I love block periodization, or concentrated loading. So for an athlete
Mhm.
who's a type 2A, I will have like 3 weeks of like pure strength work, 3 weeks of pure power work, 3 weeks of pure speed work, and just rotate through that, like
Okay.
a typical Issurin periodization.
Yeah.
That works very well for. But also, as I mentioned, if they found a model that they respect and admire, they can stick to that program for a lot longer because they admire that person. Also, for the type 2Bs, typically they will be best set up for high field training. So they would typically be more attracted to like higher volume bodybuilding work, and they can
Yeah.
tolerate that very well. They need physiological feedback that they're doing a good job because they are extremely emotional driven. So if they don't feel an exercise in a target muscle, it actually kills their motivation because it tells them I'm not being good. I'm not doing this exercise properly. I'm not good. I'm shit. I'm crap. And it just piles on from there. It's just snowball from there. So they need to feel that muscle. They need the technically the way you feel the muscle doesn't matter that much for strength or hypertrophy, but for them it does simply because it makes them more motivated. For them, if you're coaching them in the gym and say, well, you're doing a lat pull down, and they say, well, should I be feeling in my quads? Then you probably should change the exercise. Unless you have a very good method that will allow them to feel the exercise. So because of that, they respond well to slower tempos, slower eccentrics, pause lifting, squeezing the contraction, superset, drop set, anything that creates that burning sensation. And when it comes to
Mm.
cardio, for example, well, they will be the ones who love doing those intervals in a pool of sweat
Yeah.
because that's
Yeah.
feedback that I'm doing a good job. If you compare that to the type 1B are very bad with lactic acid. I mean, if they have one flaw, it's the bad tolerance for lactic acid. And that's
Hmm.
because a very high ratio of fast twitch fibers, mostly.
Yeah. Gotcha.
If you look at the type 3, it has to be, they can train pretty much anyway, any type, but it's like they don't train well when like going to failure is the goal. Okay. Because
Hmm.
that will lead to conditions that don't feel fully controlled. There might be some technical breakdown. They might feel like they're not controlling the weight anymore, and that kills their motivation. So they're more of a strength skill approach. So they need to have each rep be done perfectly. So failure for them is not a really good method as far as building muscle, even though physiologically it makes more sense. Closeness to failure does build more hypertrophy, but if it's creating more anxiety and kills your motivation, the point is that you will just not be training as hard anymore.
Hmm.
So for example, I mean, if I'm looking at strength, for example, the best model I can think of for them, because they're extraordinarily patient, would be Doc Hepburn's progression model, which I could
Yeah.
never do for it. Even if you gave me 10 millions, I would not do it. Okay, well, maybe for 10 millions, but now, and for those who don't know what the Hepburn progression is that you have to do 8 sets of 3 reps on an
Mm.
exercise with the same weight, then 5 sets of 5 on the same exercise with the same weight. But even if you only do the first part, let's say 8 sets of 3 reps with the same weight, the way it works is the first week you do 1 set of 3 reps, and then you do 7 sets of 2 reps. Okay. The next
Hmm.
session, you add one total rep. So now you have two
Yeah.
sets of 3 reps and 6 sets of 2 reps. Then the next workout, you add 1 rep. So now it's 3 sets of 3 and 5 sets of 2. See that it will literally take you what, like 1, 2, 6, 7.
Is it like 8 week,
It will take
eight, 9 weeks?
yeah, to add 10 pounds to the bar. Okay, and it's gonna work. I mean, if you stick with it, you will increase your squat by something like 20 kilos, 30 kilos over the year. But I mean, I would shoot myself before I made any gains. But a type 3 can do that perfectly fine,
Mm.
because they're extremely patient and they are more motivated by mastering a movement than adding weight to the bar. They're patient. It's not a problem. So that would be an example. We talked earlier about weightlifting being a good approach for them because they love the technical mastery. It's weird because
Mm.
the typical type 3, okay, not hybrid, like a typical type 3 would be a marathon runner, okay. I mean, that's the mindset you need to have to be running 3 hours straight. I mean, you need to be patient. You need to be not bored to death. Like my wife,
Yeah.
being a type 1B, is the complete opposite type. She's actually in very good cardiovascular condition. She yesterday she did this crazy CrossFit WOD that like literally I could not do the first exercise. Okay, so she's in good cardiovascular condition. But if you tell her to jog 800 meters, she will kill you. Okay, because a type 1B, that's excruciating, just mentally. But a type 3 is a natural marathon runner. And imagine the body type you have in front of you, that would be the typical type 3. So tighter posture, stuff like that. So the first thing a coach would think, well, I'm going to put that person on machines because they're not built for lifting. And that's the number one mistake, because what motivates them is learning,
Yeah.
mastering. So yeah, they might be more might be more nervous or anxious about putting a bar on their shoulders and squatting, but they will stay motivated until they master that movement. Whereas a leg press, I mean, you've mastered it in a week. Now you need
Yeah.
to rely on increasing intensity or increasing load, which is not their driving force. So that doesn't necessarily
Mm.
fit their profile. Like a good progression model for a type 3 is what I call the fixed weight progression model. The Hepburn would be an example because it's so slow. It's not fixed weight, but it's super slow. Fixed weight progression is that each week you do stay at the same weight, but you change the conditions under which the repetitions are done, making them harder. So, for example, the first week you might get 8 reps at a normal tempo. The second week you try to keep the same weight, but now using let's say a 4 or 5 seconds eccentric. Then the next week you might hold the middle position for 3 seconds during the eccentric. The next
Mm.
week you hold the mid position 3 seconds during the concentric. And then the last week you hold the middle position 3 seconds both on the eccentric and concentric. So if you can maintain the same weight from week to week, you're getting stronger because you're making the
Yeah.
reps tougher. So that would be a fixed weight progression model. So after those 5 weeks, you add weight. And now the good thing is that all those methods, like the slow eccentric, the isometrics, they improve technical learning, right? Which is
Mm.
what the type 3 needs. So when they get back to the heavier weight, now the technique is better, and it actually feels a lot easier than it felt with the 2 pauses on week 5. So
Mm-hmm.
there's zero anxiety. A lot of people, for example, okay, and that's the best example, and you've seen this, and every coach has seen this. You ask a client to do a body weight squat, perfect
Mm-hmm.
technique, or close to perfect, full range, upright torso, looks good. The moment you put a bar on their back, it's like hunched over, and they can't squat down past like 100 degrees.
Yeah.
And they just can't. They physically can't get lower than that. Why? Because the anxiety of the bar on their back create tightness in the hip flexors and hamstrings,
Mm-hmm.
which shorten the range of motion. Also tighten up the traps and pec minors, so it gives them that position. So it's a
Yeah.
protective position. Like so the reason for that, the reason why the flexors get tighter is it's a protective mechanism for when we were cavemen to protect the internal organs. Okay, but the body doesn't know the difference between a tiger is attacking me and a bar is trying to crush me, right? So it does the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
The flexors get tight, it modifies your technique, and so if you're capable of physically doing a body weight squat, the moment you had weight, if your squat crumbles, it's not a mobility issue. Even you give them
Mm.
all the mobility you want, it won't change anything. They just need to get comfortable squatting. You can start
Yeah.
with a goblet squat. You can start with an easier version, but get them used to squatting with a load.
Nice. I know we just reached a little over an hour. I've just got one more question for you, so I don't take up too much of your time. Around the idea of the acetyl choline enzyme. Obviously, there's different supplements out there now. Alpha GPC
Yeah,
being one of them. Is that something that can, I don't know, what a
it
different
works.
neurotype could take to help them?
Absolutely. I mean, that's something that, although I will tell you some, be careful. When you play with brain chemistry, it's very easy to mess things up because I mean, acetylcholine is one thing that nobody can have too much of. So honestly, it's
Mm.
very hard to screw up by boosting acetylcholine. It will always work
Mm.
with everybody. One beep, maybe less because they already have acetylcholine, but it will work for everybody. It increases power output, it increases learning, it increases motor programming. That's a very good product. But when you try, for example, to increase dopamine, let's say I want to increase dopamine because dopamine gets me amped up. Dopamine gets me happy. The problem is that every single supplement that increases dopamine will lower serotonin. And on the other hand, every I mean, okay, if I'm sleeping, I'm anxious, I'm going to take a supplement that increases serotonin. Well, anything that increases serotonin will decrease dopamine. So you got to be
Mhm.
careful with that. Okay, but acetylcholine is certainly something that pretty much anybody can benefit from, except maybe the type 1B. But even then, they will get like it's like topping off the
Gotcha.
glass if you want, or the gas tank. So alpha GPC is really good. CDP choline is probably the best.
Okay.
So I like a mix of both. What happens is they actually speed up neurological transmission. It actually, the cool thing with increasing acetylcholine is that it basically potentiate every single other neurotransmitters because it increases the
Mm.
speed of connection of your brain, so it makes every other neurotransmitter function better. It also decreases the need for adrenaline because acetylcholine has many of the same function as adrenaline. So if you have more acetylcholine, you don't need to increase adrenaline as much. You're much less likely to choke under pressure. So yeah, when it comes to nootropics, uh, alpha GPC and CDP choline are my first go-to. Then we look at
Okay.
individual situation, like no pept could be good, and the racetam families could be good for someone who has adrenaline problems, like someone who
Mm.
just cannot, and that's pretty unusual, but it can happen in an overtrained type 2A, for example, uh, or maybe an overtrained type 1B. We could take ordenine. Ordenine will basically lengthen the life of adrenaline. So you're not producing more adrenaline, but the adrenaline you produce stays longer. Quercetin will do the
Mm.
same thing. So it's not something that most people need because maintaining adrenaline too high for too long can actually lead to overtraining by downregulating the beta adrenergic receptors. But if you need it, for example, if you need a sustained adrenaline level, for example, it's a powerlifting competition. Or even a weightlifting. Well, at weightlifting, you don't want too high adrenaline. That's the difference between adrenaline and weightlifting. I mean, I see that you
Mm.
will see power lifter like slam their head on the bar, get slapped. You don't
Yeah.
really see that in weight. You're gonna pull your
No.
ears or squeeze your traps. That's pretty much it. But being over amped up in the Olympic lift will just lead to like cutting your pull short. But in
Yeah.
weightlifting, especially since the meets are so long, then using something like quercetin or ordenine will allow you to avoid crashing between lifts, which often happens. It could
Mm.
also be used in like a rugby game could be used because it's a fairly long and you need a high intensity. So ordenine could
Yeah.
be used to maintain adrenaline levels.
Nice, nice, perfect. I think that's a good way to end this podcast, Christian. Do you want to maybe plug where people can find you and follow you, and I'll link those up in the description too?
Well, honestly, Thibaudeau is the word. Whether you're on Instagram, on YouTube, on the internet, there's just Thibaudeau, Thibarmy, and that will lead you anywhere you want to go. Also, tnation.com is where
Hmm.
I have the most articles. I also have a Q&A section there. So if you don't want to ask me questions, you can always go to tnation, and I'm answering pretty much any question.
Ah, perfect. No, well, thanks for coming on, Christian. I really appreciate it. In those. Perfect. Done. This live stream to finish. This won't. My record button won't let me stop the record, but that's okay. We can just chill. I don't know why it's done this. It's this platform can be funny sometimes. But no, thanks for coming on. Honestly, I appreciate it heaps. I've been reading your stuff for so long and everything. It's awesome to chat about a lot of the neurotyping stuff because that's out of stuff I haven't dove too much into. So it's super interesting.
I appreciate it. It's not a topic I often talk about because it's pretty niche, but if
Mm.
people take the time to really understand it, it can make a big difference.
Yeah, I need to. I must have downloaded your thing. I might have to download it again and go through it again. All the different
Well, I have a
neurotyping
new
things.
version, so just shoot me
Oh yeah,
shoot me an email because I'll forget. So
yeah,
shoot me an
perfect.
email and I'll send you the updated PDF. I don't have we haven't recorded it yet. I have
Yeah,
given it in person once, but it has a lot more information about training methods, training styles, how to coach people depending on their type. It's
yeah.
a lot more up to date.
Perfect. Now I'll shoot you an email after this, but this should be out in a couple of weeks anyway, and I'll email it to you as well
Excellent.
once it's out. Perfect.
Great.
All
All
good.
right.
All right. Cheers, Christian.
Thank you,
Appreciate
man.
it.